Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Compassion and Choices webinar entitled Education and Empowerment, Reducing End of Life Disparities. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge Hospice and Palliative Care Awareness Month. And part of this webinar will address the need in education for hospice and palliative care. Now, before we get started, I want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded, that you are muted, but we will have time for Q&A at the end of the webinar. But once Q&A begins, we're asking you to please type your questions in the question box. Well, who is Compassion and Choices? Compassion and Choices is the largest national nonprofit organization dedicated to improving care, expanding options, and ensuring that everyone is empowered to have end-of-life care that reflects their values and priorities. At Compassion and Choices, we have convened an African American Leadership Council. 2 of our council members will be speaking to you today, but this council has been convened to address policy issues around African American communities and also help us to engage with African American communities across the country. The goal of this seminar, the goals rather of this seminar, is empowerment through education. We want to increase awareness about the value of hospice care and advanced care planning in the African American community. We want to identify and discuss end-of-life disparities, and we want to make sure that we share our resources with you. So the agenda will go as follows. We will have Artemisia Moore, we call her Missy. She's a registered nurse, talk about the benefits of hospice and advanced care planning. I believe she's an LPN now. And then we'll have Reverend Charles Mcneil offer the faith perspective on end of life. My colleague, Dr. Rebecca Thomann, will then discuss the disparities data that we have around end of life, and that will be followed by Representative Marina Moran of the 65th District. So let's begin. Artemisia's story. Artemisia Moore was born in Philadelphia, PA, and is a resident currently of Washington, D.C. Her wealth of experience and knowledge in nursing spans over 30 years. She currently is Director of Staff Development at Bridgepoint Nursing and Rehabilitation Center at Capitol Hill. Prior to this position, she was Director of Staff Development at the Capitol Hill Nursing Center. She has a Master of Business Development, Mentorship, and Networking. She owns a consulting agency that provides conference planning and trainings to include leadership, among other various topics. Missy's dynamic contributions to the nursing field are remarkable. She was Nurse of the Year. She won Nurse of the Year from the National Black Nurses Association, as well as the 2012 Lillian Custer Award from the National Federation of Licensed Practical Nurses. I would like to bring Missy Moore forth to discuss and tell us her story. Missy.
Thank you, Donna, for that wonderful introduction. I really appreciate it. Hospice is something that I love to talk about. I've been a nurse for 33 years, and of those 33 years, I spent 25 of those years caring for people at the end of life, and specifically doing hospice. But I think that my experience really came in handy when my oldest son was diagnosed with cancer. And I'll speak his name. His name was Demetrius Glover. And This is where hospice really came in to support me. And as long as I had did hospice, I didn't realize until it was really for me just how beneficial, how many services were put in place to support me. The first thing that we did when my son was diagnosed with cancer was to have a conversation with him about his advanced care planning. What were the things that he wanted to have done that were going to make his end of life pleasant for him? And we discussed those things at length. It was a very difficult conversation for me to have with my son, but he said that he wanted to be home, that he didn't want to have any heroic measures, and that he wanted to be comfortable. And this is what we did. And it was a little bit of pushback because initially the medical team felt like they could have done more aggressive things, and that wasn't really what my son wanted. But overall, we did what my son wanted. We contacted a hospice, and hospice provides a good amount of services to support you to care for your loved one at home. So we had a nurse, a social worker, a chaplain, volunteers. It was a physician and a nurse practitioner on call. It was a pharmacy that delivered medication. It was a medical equipment company that came to our home. They brought an electric bed, a bedside commode, oxygen, portable oxygen, just about everything that we needed to care for Demetrius at home. And this was a big weight lifted off of me, because at this time in my life, it was time for me to be Demetrius's mother and not Demetrius's nurse. And hospice gave me an opportunity to be with my son, to live every day with my son until my son passed away. I can't say enough about what hospice does for families. Even when my son passed away, I was offered bereavement services. I had a counselor, which I took them up on, because it was things that I needed to help me with the death of my son. It's a lot of myths and misconceptions about hospice. A lot of people think, well, they don't do anything when you say that you want hospice. But the fact of the matter is, they do everything. They do everything. They put things in place so that the person has comfort, so that they decrease their suffering, so that they can support their families, so that the patients can live until they pass away. Donna, I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak about my son, Demetrius, about the wonderful opportunity that we had with hospice, for the great days that I had, all 24 of them, because I only had 24 days until my son died. But hospice made those days memorable for me. I appreciate you, and I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Missy, thank you so much for sharing your heartfelt story about your son with us. You know, as African Americans, we don't talk about end of life enough. And so it prohibits us from preparing the way we should. Our next speaker is Reverend Charles Mcneil. But before I bring him on, I want to talk to and thank my technical staff, Chris Meacham. I want to thank you. But I see that Representative Moran is in the audience, so we're going to need you to unmute her when you get a chance. She'll be coming up shortly.
Will do.
Thank you so much. Okay, back to you, Reverend Mcneil. Sorry. Reverend Charles Mcneil Jr. is the president of the National Capital Baptist Convention of Washington, D.C. and vicinity. He also serves on the board of directors of the National Baptist Convention, USA, Inc. He is the second vice president of the Minnesota Conference, the Ministers Conference, the third vice moderator of the Mount Bethel Baptist Association, and he is the Washington, D.C. Faith Command Leader of the National Black Church Initiative. He's also a board member and treasurer of the United Community Against Poverty, UCAP. He has also appeared on MSNBC as a commentator. Reverend Mcneil?
Well, thank you, Donna, for allowing me to come, and thank you, Rebecca, for allowing me to be able to talk today on this most vital and important subject that face many of our members, especially those who of us are in the faith community. And as we come today, many of our faith leaders somewhat are confused by what we talk about compassionate choices, and whenever they decide that they want to use compassion and choices or use a bill that has been designed to end life, they have a conflict with their faith. But we do understand that in our faith, we live by our faith, but it is our faith that takes us to our ultimate reward or whatever destiny that we believe in. One of the things that I've had to do as a faith leader was really to reconcile with my congregation and with my members and with my constituents of the importance of compassion and choices. The ability to be able to understand that if someone decides to end their life through this process, that it is not necessarily sin, that God always has an alternative measure for us. And by us being able to have some compassion in our faith and some religion, and some understanding about where the bill leads us, it gives us the ability to know that regardless of what we believe, that the bill gives us the tenacity and the resolve to know that our faith is what guides us. So many times
May I ask you a question, please? Could you also speak to the need for education around end of life education and advanced care directives, and just the planning for life, and what role the church can play in that?
Well, the role that the church plays for the advanced care is that we have to educate our people about being prepared to meet to the next stage of life, not the next stage of death. And so many times, as Donna has said, just to talk about it is not that you're going to die. So the church plays a vital role in educating and getting our people prepared for it. Some of the things that we've been able to do is to do education in the community, in the faith-based community, give them the understanding of the law and what it really means. And we've been able to take that on a national tour to let folk know how the law has been used in different parts of the country, and how members of the faith community how they're now, once they read the law, how they understand the law and begin to use the law.
All right, thank you so much, sir. Yes, we often say that talking about death ain't gonna kill you, but not preparing could really hurt you and your family. The next person I would like to bring on is Dr. Rebecca Thomann. She was trained at the University of Minnesota Department of Family Practice and Community Health. She is a manager at Compassionate Choices for Doctors for Dignity, a campaign which is a community of physicians who advocate for a full range of end-of-life options. Rebecca?
Thank you, Donna. I'm going to walk through some of the data that we have about end-of-life disparities. I'm going to take myself off the video so I don't distract you from getting a chance to look at the data on the slides. There's not a whole lot of data on this topic, but there is a small body of data that's beginning to accrue. And so I'll cover some of what we know about end-of-life disparities. So we really can't start to talk about disparities without mentioning that COVID-19 has taken a disproportionate impact on the African American community. This chart gives some of the comparison of the incidence of COVID-19 impact on white versus Black Minnesotans. So if you look at the graph, you'll see that per 100,000 people, white people versus Black people, Black people have about a twice as high a positive testing rate as white individuals. They are hospitalized at a higher rate, and they suffer from death. They're dying from COVID-19 at a higher death rate. And so the pandemic is really shining light on some historic health disparities that have plagued communities of color for generations. I wanted to also, just before we plunge in, to talk a little bit about hospice and palliative care. And Missy did a very nice job of describing hospice care. It's not a place. People think of hospice as a place. It's really a set of services that are designed to treat symptoms and side effects, improve quality of life, and support families and address their spiritual needs. So palliative care and hospice are really the same thing. Palliative care is something that a patient would receive at any stage of illness. Hospice care is a benefit that one can get from Medicare coverage. It applies during the last 6 months of life, only after treatment has stopped. So patients who are actively undergoing treatment can receive palliative care, which is the same sort of services that help them as they're treating their disease. The difference is that hospice, you have to stop treatment, and it's during the last 6 months of life. So Medicare does cover hospice, but it may not cover all palliative care, and coverage for palliative care services varies by insurance companies. But I want to emphasize that most hospice and palliative care actually happens in the home. So again, Missy mentioned some of the benefits of hospice care. I think of it as shifting from being disease-centered to being patient-centered. It's not about fighting the disease, it's about caring for the person. It's generally in the home. It involves a wide array of health professionals and support services, like Missy mentioned. And the whole goal really is to reduce symptoms, reduce suffering, support families and help them through activities of daily living, but also through spiritual and emotional support. And the way I like to summarize it is that patients who enroll in hospice feel better and live longer than patients who don't. I also wanted to address, it's kind of a mythology or a knowledge gap about hospice care. I think a lot of people think that hospice care is giving up. It means you've stopped treating me, you're going to let me die. But actually, shifting to hospice care is when you've exhausted all the treatments, or when the treatments, the risks of the treatment or the side effects of the treatment outweigh the benefits of the treatment. And so it's moving to comfort care. And it's, like I said, that whole set of medical services that happens primarily in the home. And that's another fiction. People think hospice is a place where you go to die or you send your people. They equate it with abandonment. But actually, most hospice care occurs right in the home. And in fact, half of the patients on hospice die in their own homes. Hospice care can also be given in the hospitals and in hospice care settings. And then the last thing I think is a common belief that, hospice is what doctors recommend when they're ready to let you die. And I think that, in fact, hospice care is the best care you can get at the end of life when you've exhausted your treatments. It's really the cream of the crop for care. And that's why I'm concerned a little bit about some of the disparities that we know occur at the end of life. So, for example, some of the disparities that we know about are pain treatment. We know that African American patients are undertreated for pain at the end of life. Studies have shown that they get lower doses of medications, in fact, doses that are lower than are recommended by the World Health Organization. And they are much more likely to receive an invasive surgery in the last month of life. So the question has to be, why is that happening? I can say for sure that there are racist attitudes in medicine that I think have an impact on the pain perception and management. In fact, surveys of medical students have indicated they have some false beliefs about biological based differences in Black versus white patients. And then there's the association of drug seeking behavior or drug abuse, or this false perception that Black people don't suffer pain as much as white people. So some of these are, these have been historically handed down and understood in medicine for a long time. And I'm very proud to say that the House of Medicine and the Minnesota Medical Association are taking real big steps to address the differences between attitudes of racism, but still understanding the social determinants of health. As far as surgery in the last month of life, a lot of questions come up that I hope some of our panelists will speak to. So is this a matter of a preference? Is there a cultural preference for intervention at the end of life? Do patients actually want everything done? Or is this a default do everything that kind of happens in medicine? If you say nothing, you'll get everything. And is that necessarily the best care? Is there equating more care with better care? Or is it just simply a matter of patients have not thought ahead or have done an advanced care planning, and so they end up just kind of getting into that cog in the wheel and getting more and more medical care? And the other question would be, do they sufficiently understand the risks and benefits of their care? Is communication really happening between doctors and patients? So just a little bit about hospice use. Hospice is really underutilized. Only about 51% of Medicare enrollees who died used hospice care in 2018. At the bottom, I have that Minnesota is a little bit higher than that at 53.5%. But when you look at all of the hospice enrollees, you can see that 82% are white and only 8% are Black. So we know that Black patients are underutilizing hospice. And again, why is that happening? I think research has suggested some reasons, such as lack of knowledge. Just sort of surveying patients to see if they know what hospice is. A lot of them don't know what it is, or they may have some significant misinformation, which is what I had mentioned earlier. In some instances, they're just never offered hospice. The doctors may be uncomfortable talking to them about death. Again, they may have no advance directive, or they might actually prefer more aggressive treatment. And then I'm hoping the Reverend will talk a little bit more about, there's been suggestions that hospice care and advanced care planning are somehow in conflict with spiritual beliefs. The attitude that God will determine, God will take me when he's ready. So that's something that I think we should talk more about, but that's been suggested as a possible reason why patients seek more aggressive care. So when we look at some of the data on advanced care planning, we know that when it comes to, compared to whites, African Americans are much less likely to have completed an advance directive. They're also much less likely to even have spoken about death in their families. There's some discomfort with that. And, the question is, why is that happening? Is that because, again, they don't know about advanced care planning? No one has really raised it with them. The most important thing in advanced care planning that I think is underemphasized is that it's really more about anticipating future potential medical needs and discussing the decisions in the context of a person's values and priorities. So really, advanced care planning is about discussing what's important in your life. It's about values and priorities, what makes life worth living. And the most important part of that, other than the conversations, is to name an agent. So who is going to speak for you at the end? And talking about advanced care planning, in the white culture, it's very much get what, you be in control. It's all about what you want. And in other cultures, the African American and the Hispanic and Latino cultures, advanced care planning is more about doing something for your families, making it easier for them so they know what to do. It's more of a group or a family participatory thing. Again, I want to mention some of the benefits of advanced care planning. I think it helps the family understand and communicate better so that they can be thinking about how to plan for the end of life. It also helps families. We know from research that families experience less distress and conflict when there has been some planning in advance. And then I just wanted to mention dementia, because dementia is twice as likely in the African American community. And I think, the risk factors for dementia and Alzheimer's are old age, the same risk factors for other chronic disease, nutrition, exercise, lifestyle, environmental factors. And so it's not a surprise that Alzheimer's is disproportionately impacts the Black community. So I don't know if we have figured out how to get Representative Marina Moran on the line.
I do believe I'm here if you can hear me.
Yay! We can't see you, but we can hear you.
There you
We
go.
Oh, we can see her. Awesome.
Okay, see, Dr. Rebecca, you are going out of turn. I had this wonderful introduction. Let me introduce the Marina Moran. I had the pleasure of meeting her because I spoke every year at the Nobel Women's Conference. And I just love Nobel Women. They are the national organization of Black elected legislators. They are all women and they are all fierce. And President Karen Camper is on. Did you know that, Rep. Moran?
I did not know that. That is awesome.
So, yeah, hey, President Camper. But back to my little shout out here. So at the Capitol, Representative Moran represents the St. Paul communities of Rondo, Frogtown, Summit University, Thomasdale, Midway, and a portion of North End and Cathedral Hill. She currently chairs the House Health and Human Services Policy Committee, working to expand health care coverage, reduce prescription drug prices, eliminate health disparities, and remove barriers to critical safety net programs. She is a founding member. You moved it. We need to go back. Thank you. She's a founding member and chair of the People of Color and Indigenous Caucus and United Black Legislative Caucus. On a national level, she serves as executive secretary of the National Black Caucus of State Legislators, NBCSL, which we are also on that corporate board, Midwest Region Coordinator for the National Organization of Black Elected Legislative Women, Nobel, and as the Minnesota State Director for both the Women Legislators Lobby and the National Foundation for Women Legislators. Now this is the thing I did not know about you. I knew about all that other stuff, but she is a proud mother of 7 and a grandmother of 8. I don't know how you do it. I have 1 and I'm struggling. So with all of that, I really want to thank you and I want to introduce Representative Marina Moran.
Well, good afternoon, Donna. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here today. I am excited to take part in this discussion. So, but I'm also, let me just say that what you didn't mention is I'm also the chair of the Select Committee on Racial Justice. This past legislative session, we declared racism as a public health crisis. And so we've been having hearings around that. Has been very educational and informational for a bicameral legislative body, who we have both parties who are a part of that hearing. And so a little bit about the end of life option. So in Minnesota, we introduced House File 2152. It is an end of life option that allows medical aid in dying medication. And the language for this bill is, the bill allows a qualified individual to request and obtain medical aid in dying medication to be self-administered by a qualified individual, which is themselves, and specifies requirements. And so this is for someone who is terminally ill and expected to live no more than 6 months. So this bill came to me from a constituent of mine who is dying. She is currently in Florida. She has cervical cancer. and she's dying from it. And so every winter she goes to Florida because her body just cannot sustain the cold weather here. And she came to me and she shared her story with me um, about going through treatments, um, going through several different treatments, and realizing that, you know, the cancer continued to come back, and that at the end of her life, in those last days, if she chose to, she wanted to have the option to be able to take a medical aid where she would be able to just go to sleep. And, you know, in her story, in her persistence, in her testimony, and constantly testifying, really, as chair of the Health and Human Service Policy Committee, really opened me up to maybe the awareness and the possibilities of allowing this to happen. I am really a person of choice. And we know that as the testifier right before me, who shared that often Blacks are, you know, are seen to be able to endure pain at a higher rate. And so um, they are not giving, you know, those pain pills at a higher level as our Caucasian folks. But it was really just made sense to me that if someone who had gone through all the processes and were dying, and it was a painful death, that they should have the option to just take a type of medication that will allow them to just go to sleep and end it that way. And to be able to plan that with their families, you know, to have their loved ones surrounding them, where they have all come to the conclusion and the acceptance that this is okay to do. And so we held that hearing. It was a very controversial hearing, should I say, with many passionate people on both sides of the aisles debating this. But it's something that I believe in the state of Minnesota that we should create the opportunity and the possibility for someone who is who has 6 months to live, who have gone through every other stage, and there's no other option because they are going to die, to have this option to choose their end of life options. And I just thought about this myself because my mother died from cancer. And then I have a sister who also died of cancer. You know, it's like so many of us in the Black community where we don't really discuss death and dying. Um, we, um, you know, we don't know the many options that may be available to us. And because of that, I just wonder how different my engagement as a 20-year-old when my mother was dying, as a 20-year-old, how different those last moments of my mother's life would and could have been had we had someone to sit down and walk us through the end of life options, or to walk us through the process of what was going to happen. Uh, and maybe she could have been at home with us instead of in the hospital, going through those last moments of life. And so for me, you know, looking at end of life options, looking at, you know, death through compassion and giving choices, which is what this is, compassion and choices, to make that available, to make it legal, to me is just a next step that I think and believe that we should be doing. And I would like to see us do in the state of Minnesota.
Thank you so much. So I want to encourage everyone. Now's the time that we will begin Q&A. But I also want to acknowledge Shilpa, who is also part of our tech team. Could you open President Karen Camper's mic? If she wants to say something, she can speak. If she does not, that's fine. But we want to acknowledge that Nobel women 2 years ago passed a resolution. Therefore, be it resolved that Nobel women must be proactive in educating, empowering, and advocating for our community at the end of life. We are committed to developing an awareness campaign to share resources with our constituents. And so, Compassionate Choices offers roundabout education about the end of life. We have a legislative arm, which does our advocacy in terms of getting bills passed around medical aid and dying, but we also have a leg that's just education around hospice and advanced care directives, and other end of life issues that people, especially our people, need to know about. We feel that if we can educate you on all of your end of life options, that will empower you to be your own best advocate. And education and empowerment will help address some of the healthcare disparities we face. With that, if you want to put a question in the question box, we will address your questions. Like I said, if President Camper wanted to say anything, we would allow her time. Let me ask a question then of the panel. Missy did a great job of describing, and so did Representative Moran, describing the benefits of hospice. But I'd like for anyone on the panel to discuss maybe your theory as to why African American patients are less likely to enroll in hospice.
Let's have our panelists start their cameras.
Reverend Mcneil or Miss, okay.
Hi, Donna.
Hi.
I think one of the reasons African Americans do not enroll in hospice is because I feel that they don't have a good understanding of hospice. And sometimes it may be the approach. I think that it's a very, very difficult conversation, and you have to be able to speak to people in a way that they understand that it's going to be helpful to them. So in my experience as a hospice nurse, a lot of times what I talked about was the services that were going to be offered with the hospice service when you signed on to hospice. So to let them know that it's going to be a group of individuals, a group of healthcare professionals that are going to support you through what it is that you need to do. And the other is having very frank conversations about the myths that they hear. Oh, well, they don't do anything. Well, no, actually, these are some of the things that we do. Well, it means that we're giving up. No, actually, it means that we're going to put more effort in making them comfortable so that they have more time. We want you to have more time. And I use words like that because I want people to understand that we want them to have more time. We want them to be pain-free. But it's a difficult conversation, and it may not be one that you could have just one time. It may be something that you may need to have over a period of time. And it's the same with the advanced directives. Just because someone says, no, I don't want to talk about it today, you may have to wait a little while and revisit it. You know, the last time we were here, we talked about advanced directives and you weren't ready to talk about it. But I think that we should talk about some of the options to give you something to think about. It's not a one-time conversation because people change their mind. They may say initially, they say, I want everything done. And a good way to start the conversation is when someone says to you, I think I want to have everything done. If something happens to me, if you ask them, okay, what does that mean? You'd be surprised what they tell you. They really don't even know what that means. So you may have to describe certain things that are in an advanced directive to help them understand it. But that takes training, that takes education. It takes time for the providers. They have to know how to speak to the patients so that the patients can understand what it is that they're trying to do to help them.
Thank you, Missy. Very good food for thought. I think the first key thing you said is you have to know what your own values are first. And we have an end of life toolkit that can help you discover what your own values are. Number two, once you have discovered that, you need to have that conversation with your loved ones and fill out your advanced care planning directive and choose a healthcare proxy that will do what you want them to do as opposed to doing what they want to do. But we have President Karen Camper on the line from the great state of Tennessee. President Camper?
Greetings. I'm trying to unmute. Greetings.
We
can
hear
hear
you.
Yep.
Okay, hey everybody, and thank you, Donna, so much for allowing me an opportunity to just say hello and bring greetings to everyone. I wasn't expecting to speak. I really just wanted to hear the information, so I really appreciate that. I also appreciate you all's commitment to Nobel Women. I mean, ever since we started this relationship, it has grown and gotten better every year, and so I appreciate that. But the other thing I appreciate is the fact that we're having this very important conversation right now. With everything that's happening with COVID-19 and businesses and nonprofits having to still operate with limited resources, you all have really stayed true to your mission and the things that are important for people during this time. So I appreciate that. If you look around us and see, a lot of the death that's occurring in the Black community or in general, but particularly in the Black community as it pertains to COVID-19, we do need to have more of these types of discussions so people can be more prepared. And maybe this is a time where people are more open to hearing, understanding, and appreciating what these conversations mean to families. Because remember now in COVID-19, we've been isolated from one another. There's been a light shown on a lot of disparities and just a lot of things we're learning. So if we had a lot of these advanced directives in place, if we had a lot of these plans in place with our family, if we had done more discussion around these things about palliative care, about hospital, about all of it, a lot of us would be feeling a lot more comfortable about what's going on with our families during this time. So I think it's important that we're having this conversation. You've always made it a priority to reach out to us and involve us, and we really appreciate it. Getting to our members, they appreciate it. So I want to thank everybody for participating on this panel today. I've learned some stuff myself. I kind of wanted to ask a question. I couldn't. Somebody made a point about Alzheimer's and how African Americans are disproportionately impacted by that for some reason too. I'd like to go back to visit that. But anyway, thank you for allowing me to bring greetings and say hello to everybody. I'm really appreciating this conversation.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Rebecca, do you want to address the dementia question she asked?
Sure. Hi, yes. The statistics show that African Americans are about twice as likely to experience Alzheimer's disease. And it really goes in line with so many other disparities. I mean, the risk factors for Alzheimer's is age. The older you get, the more likely you are to get it. Beyond that, it really is, I don't want to say lifestyle because that suggests there's a choice, but it's life, environment, and situation. So the same people who struggle with chronic disease because they live in polluted areas or don't have access to healthy food and the other social determinants of health, that has an impact on Alzheimer's disease as well, increases the risk of that. So I think, so many diseases, when we look at the rates and the burdens on various populations, the African American population suffers disproportionately. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, it did.
Thank you, Rebecca. I have a question from the audience. This may be directed at Reverend Mcneil, but it's specifically about Catholic faith. It says, hi, I'm a practicing Catholic. Can you provide me some language that could be supportive to another Catholic struggling in making peace without guilt in their decision making? Reverend Mcneil? You're on mute, sir. You're on mute, Reverend Mcneil. Take yourself off of mute.
All right, there you go. Yeah, it went out a little bit. What was the question again, Donna?
Can someone said, I'm a practicing Catholic. Can you provide me some language that could be supportive to another Catholic struggling and making peace without guilt in their decision making? I'm not sure any of our other panelists are Catholics. If they are, they could speak to that if they want to as well.
Okay, sure. I mean, especially if you're talking about in life issues or a person is suffering. One case that I had to deal with in my congregation was that a young man, mother, had an aneurysm, and there was no chances of recovering. And one of the things that he was really dealing with was the guilt of pulling the plug. To see and pulling the plug, it would make him feel as if he was killing his mother, and he wanted to, he didn't want to carry that guilt. And I told him, I said, look, your mother's already gone. Now, what you're looking at here is just a shell. The spirit is still there. It's still a part of her, and it's a part of you. And you are now to carry on her legacy. We have to understand that living is a part of death. Even Jesus prepares us. He in order to get to heaven or to get our reward, there has to be a transition. So the peace that you would find would be in knowing that regardless of where you are or the guilt that you may feel, that God still loves you. And we have to understand that. And know that the decisions that we make are divine decisions that comes to us through the Spirit. So we should not feel guilty about some of the decisions that we have to make that are dealing with end of life, because Christ had to make a decision about end of life as well. Mary and Martha, if you're familiar with that story, Mary and Martha had to deal with the death of their brother. But Jesus came along and gave them hope. And the hope that we have in our guilt or in our peace is knowing that Christ will be with us in any of the decisions that we make. So therefore, the guilt that we carry is something that we should not dwell on, but we should look at the decisions that we have to make for the betterment of not only ourselves, but to unite us with God.
Thank you. Powerful. I have another question. Thank you for this presentation and discussion. My question for anyone on the panel: how do I, as a white death and bereavement educator, approach and help people of color to understand the benefits of end-of-life planning and/or hospice care? I recognize the gross, unacceptable history of mistreatment. How do we overcome that? So I will open this up for anyone on the panel to address, but if I may, I'm the National African American Outreach Director. And I think one thing you said that is very important is you have to acknowledge the distrust of the medical field by African Americans and why that is. There are so many cases. They're very easy to look up. I have my email address at the end of this. You can certainly email me, but I think framing it and acknowledging what has happened in the past and messaging it, that by educating and empowering themselves with information, they can help to address the disparities at the end of life for themselves. One of the things that African Americans don't do enough is they do not seem to question authority enough. They don't get second and third opinions. They don't question even their religious leaders or their doctors. They need to speak up. We now know in this time, long gone is a time where you knew your doctor and your doctor knew you, and you had a relationship for years and years and years, and you could go in there and just talk to them for an hour. You probably have a lot of specialists, and you probably have 10 minutes to discuss your chronic issues and your end of life issues. And so we have some toolkits that will help you maybe ask the right questions about your diagnosis. But I feel like an answer to your question is provide people the resources and the education around end of life issues, and they will be empowered to become their own best advocates. Is there anyone else on the panel who would like to address that question?
Hi, Donna, it's Missy. I'd like to address it. One of the things that I've done in the past is to meet people where they are and to ask them what they know about their illness. This is very, very, very important. And one of the things that I look at quite a bit is health literacy. Statistically, when we look at health literacy, it says that less than half of the people that we speak to as healthcare providers really understand what we're saying. So having said that, if that means that every half the people that I talk to about their health really know what I'm talking about. And I think that that may be a big source of the confusion. It may be a big source of how they receive and understand education, diagnosis, prognosis. It makes a big difference in how they really understand what's going on with them, even when we're trying to explain that that they have a life-limiting illness. So I just want us to keep in mind that we have to meet people where they are, and it may take more than one time to explain to them what their illness is, what they can expect from their illness, and how they can get assistance from their illness. And that happens more often than not. I hope that this has been helpful.
And Donna, can I follow up on that just a little bit with Missy? I've also found that people are more comfortable even when the doctor explaining to them, even if their pastor or some religious leader is in the room with them, that they're more accepting of it.
Yeah. And can I also go back to, the question about the end of life and why we don't seek that out? And I wrote down 3 things, and I've heard Don, I've heard you talk about it, and Missy, is that one, I think often we're not offered that option around end of life conversation or choice. We do not trust medical professionals. And it's just something as African Americans that we just do not talk enough about. It is often a thought that if we talk about it, that we are making it so. Even though it is so, we don't want to be the one that is initiating that. And so it's just so hard for us as African Americans to talk about death. And so in regards to the individual who's, say, as a white person who is a healthcare professional, what can they do? And this definitely is about, acknowledging the past history in the medical field and in that relationship of impact that it has had on the Black family, the Black community. So acknowledging that, and at the same time of us not trusting medical professionals, we also trust medical professions to believe that what they say to us is the truth. And so it is really an opportunity in a very human type of way to have a conversation with someone when they are in those last moments of dying, or knowing that death may come because it's cancer or some other disease that is there, to have that really human conversation with that patient, if at all possible, but also with family members. I think that's something that does not happen enough, that we give African American and Blacks that compassion, that empathy that is needed to help them, one, to find some relief, to find some calmness and some peace in the moment of which they find themselves in. And so, I believe in being truthful, and honest about where a person is, but also offer those options of what they can do to make those last moments in that individual or that family's life the best that it can be.
Thank you. All good information. And I would just add to that that there is a degree of cultural competency that has to happen. You know, though African Americans in the US are not all monolithic in their ideas, however, their spirituality does play a huge part in the majority um, of it. And I think it is incumbent upon the medical profession, and we certainly would like to help in that endeavor, to gain a degree of cultural competency, in addition to acknowledging, as Rep. Moran said, the distrust and the misinformation and everything that has happened. What has to happen going forward is an intentional cultural competency initiative on their part, and education on the community's part that empowers them to be their own best advocates.
Donna, I just want to add one more thing. I think that today has been great having the discussion, but I think that we need to implore our leaders across the country, all African American leaders, to make it a point to have some verbiage about end of life care, because when we find that what we'll see is that if we have more leadership that has the discussion, then we'll have more people, more African American people who will have the discussion. So the leadership has to be comfortable with having it. And I think that that's a good goal and a good place for us to start. But I'm just putting my 2 cents in. Thank you.
Thank you, Missy. So to that end, we have some toolkits that will help people in having those very important discussions with family and loved ones. Rebecca, do you want to?
Yeah, I realize we're coming to the end of the hour, and I think we're just getting into the really important points. So I'm sorry that this is ending soon, and we might talk about doing something similar again. I just want to point out that some of the tools that Compassionate Choices has developed to help people get going and talking about decision making at the end of life. This is a 32-page booklet. It walks people through the basic steps of advanced care planning, starting with thinking about what matters most to you, how to talk to your family, how to choose who will speak for you, the right questions to ask your doctor, and then how to put your plan into practice. This can be downloaded on our website, and you can also get it in hard copy. We also have online tools specifically aimed at addressing dementia. And as an Alzheimer's diagnosis progresses, what are the likely symptoms that might arise, and how do you want to, what level of care do you want in response to an advancing dementia diagnosis? We also have a dementia decoder, which helps walk you through some really important questions to ask your healthcare provider, and that helps you kind of start thinking about what you might want, to get familiar with what your options are, and to try to make some plans. So the Dementia Values is an online, again, both of those are accessible on our website. And I just want to let folks know that I will send a follow-up email to you all tomorrow with the links to these tools, so you don't have to write them down feverishly right now. I'll send you the links, and if you would like to get hard copy version of the booklet here, I'll have a waste that you can let me know, and we'd be happy to send that to you too. If you'd like a little stack of those for your church or other group, that would work too. So I say thank you, and I'm going to let Donna come on and kind of close us out.
Well, with that, I want to thank each and every one of you for spending some time with us this afternoon. You could have been anywhere, and you chose to be with us. I think we're going to have a couple of more of these. As Rebecca indicated, we just got to the meat of the issue. And so please look out for an email from Rebecca. Rebecca, I think there's a contact slide, the last slide. that's our contact information. If you want to reach out to us, I'm the National African American Director for Compassion and Choices. Rebecca is the director of the Docs for Dignity program. So if you have any doctors that are interested in more information, please send them to Rebecca, and she also runs that Minnesota campaign. With that, I will return you to the rest of your day. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Donna.